Hi everybody, this is Tor Storley and I am back with another video. In this video, I want to take a look at how we can do Peter Lynch stock screening model. Instead of doing it in Go, which I did already, I realized that, perhaps most people will probably not use Go for it, but they will use maybe Python. So I decided to make a second version of this and kind of include everything, meaning getting the data from Yahoo Finance, as well as presenting the data. And I will do it in one application. So let's get started. So I created this workbook, the notebook, a Python notebook, LynchStockAnalyzer Python version. So we can use the principles we went through in the third part, I believe it was, of the Lynch Stock Screener video series. So make sure you take a look at that one, particularly in part 2, where we go through all the metrics and how to interpret them. And there's also another video I did of why finance, how to get the data and how to get all these metrics. So make sure you check those out. I'll probably put them in the description and as links in this video. So notice what we're going to do. We're going to fetch the stock data from Yahoo Finance. We're going to store the data in a DuckDB database. We're going to score the stocks using Peter Lynch's methodology. We're going to find undervalued candidates, and we can export the results to CSV. All right, so what I did was I created these files, and there are basically 3 of them. What I realized was the first attempt to do this, I put it all into one notebook. I didn't like that, so I created 2 classes instead out of it. So one is the LynchAnalyzer class. And as you can see, I have some import statements, Yahoo Finance, DuckDB, pandas, and dictionary lists. There's also an optional here. I don't know if I need that one. And also logging. So you set a reference to the logging here. Then you create a class, call it LynchStockAnalyzer, which we're going to reference when we get into the notebook. If you create classes in Python, you should be familiar with this. We're using the self keyword everywhere, right? And I also set up a default for the database path, which I call Lynch Analysis Database, which we haven't created yet, but based on how we do it, it will create it for us. Once I pass this path into this initialization function, it will actually run this code here. So we'll create a connection and it will point to that database path. We're going to set up the database here. So here's the setup function, pass in self because we're inside the class. We're going to create a table called tickers. These are the fields we're going to include. Then we're going to execute that. We're going to create that table. Notice what I'm using here. Create table if not exists. So in other words, you can run this over and over. And if the table exists, it simply won't run this, which is a nice way of doing it, I think. So here you can create the metrics table. And the metrics table are going to come from Yahoo Finance. And then we're going to load it into this table, which is called Lynch Metrics. And here is all the fields we're going to do. We're going to have some core Lynch metrics, like the PE ratios, like the PEG ratios, earnings growth, revenue growth. And then we're going to have some financial health fields, profitability fields, dividend fields, valuation metrics fields, and then some additional fields we're going to be including into this table. And then, of course, lastly, timestamp, so we know when we loaded this. And then we execute this one here. And then we log the information here. So by doing it this way, when you run this, you'll see nice outputs. Here we're adding tickers. Now there's a couple of things in here that I will show you. There's 2 ways of adding tickers. We can either do it manually via a list object, or we can read it from a CSV file. And I'll show you that when we get into this workbook. The notebook, I should say. I always say workbook. I'm used to Excel, I guess. Okay, so we're going to add tickers. It will load it into DuckDB. So that's what we're going to do. It's going to load into that tickers table we created above. And so here there's just some for loops. We have to go and insert all this stuff like based on the output that came back from Yahoo Finance. So we'll be loading one info object at a time of all these tickers we're passing in. And then the results we will insert into this table here. As you can see, the tickers table will just be the tickers. So you have like a symbol and notes in case you want to write something and make some kind of comment. And then if there's an exception, you can take care of it here in the logger. And then you have some additional stuff, and then you're returning added. That's an integer, by the way. Okay, so now you can add tickers from CSV as well. So you can add tickers from a list object that you pass in, or you can add it from a CSV. So when you add it from the CSV file, then you use this function. So I'm not going to go through that. It's very similar. And you can get active tickers. And why do I say that? Well, maybe you put a bunch of tickers into that table. So here you have an option of retrieving by flagging these guys where the active flag is true. So there's an update statement you can run to set it to false, meaning next time I run this, I don't want this to be included in the call to Yahoo Finance. So here you have that select where active is true, so it only picks up the tickers you want to use. So you're returning tickers here. Here is just view tickers, and there's a data frame, as you can see. And let me see, what does this return? Okay, it returns a list of strings, I guess. So this one, you can deactivate the ticker, and that's where you run that update to set the active flag to false for whatever tickers you're passing into this function. One thing I really like in VS Code is you can navigate to wherever the activity takes place. And I'll show you that when I get to Notebook. Okay, and then you can activate ticker here, another update statement. So you can toggle between set it to false and true depending on what you want to include when you actually run this. And of course, you can also remove tickers. So you can delete it out of the table. Here you can see it here. And these are just placeholder for whatever you're passing in. So the symbol here is a form of a string, and that comes in here, right? Using this symbol upper. So that's like a list object. So now, here is where you extract the Lynch metrics, and you're going to return that as a dictionary, like a Python dictionary. So key value pair, in other words. Here you can see the key. So you're getting via this ticker data get info method, and this comes from Yahoo Finance, this info object. Here's the metrics, which is the dictionary, and here you give them a key, and then based on whatever this function is here, you're going to get the info portion. You're looking for symbol, okay? So that goes in from this object here. So you keep doing that for all of these keys like this, and you can see there's a bunch of them. And if you saw my Go video, the part 3 one, you should have seen this before. So there's nothing new here. And then, of course, you're returning the metrics. Here you can fetch and store stock data. This is calling a function above here. So I can go to definition, and you can see here is the function here. And what I can also do is I can go to the caller by go to declaration here. So you can see it jumps back again to where I came from. So it's nice to navigate through and so to look at this and inspect what is actually happening. And here you just take care of if you don't find anything. If you requested to delete some metrics, you can delete it here. Here is just some flags, and you create an empty list object, fail tickers. Okay, so there is some additional stuff here. You can look at this, but here's the actual call to the Yahoo Finance. For each ticker, you're going to call this call, and so it's going to take care of one at a time and come up with all those metrics you saw above. And here you load those metrics here. You can do some checks, and this is kind of what you want to do. Some inspection if the data is good or not. For example, if the peg ratio is empty or none in this case, divisions here. So you don't want empty data because it will crash on you. Here we are simply doing the insert metrics, which we're calling from up here, as you can see, this one. And we're passing in the metrics one by one. That takes care of this one. And here we're simply joining all these keys right here. And another join here for placeholders. And here we're inserting the records into that Lynch metrics, all the columns we're going to need. And the values are coming from this placeholder object that you see up here, the joins here, like this one. Get the Lynch candidate. So now you're looking for the max peg of 1, because you don't want a peg ratio greater than 1. Max ROE of 15%. Max debt to equity of less than 50% is what we do. This is going to return the data frame. So here you can see some additional stuff here, arguments that we're going to pass in. And here's the actual query. And you can see here is the arguments we're looking for to filter out the data that we just inserted to see if there's any candidates here. There are some additional functions here, and you can do some select from the metrics when you're looking for individual symbols here, as you can see. And yeah, okay. You can read up on this yourself, okay? Okay, so here you're getting a connection and you're returning it. And then you can finally, when you're done with everything, you're going to close that connection here. Then there's a scorer class, as you can see. And the scorer class is doing some imports. You're creating a logger here. But here I'm using a data class, as you can see. So you can set up this class weights. You can alter these weights if you don't like them, if you want to up them or lower them or whatever you want. And you can, of course, add more. That's up to you. But okay, I set up these. So this is kind of similar to what I did in the Go project when I did this. And here's another data class for analyze stocks. Here's the weights. And then you create a class called LynchScorer. So you have one for LynchAnalyzer, one for LynchScorer. And here you do the initialization of it. The weights, the optional is none here, as you can see. Here we're setting weights. And here we are scoring stocks and returning these analysis score, okay? Which is this up here, this class we're returning. Okay, so down here now, we're setting up this class. And we're passing in the symbol, which we're going to get from the stock data here. And then from the score object, we're going to look for component scores of PEG, financial health, growth quality, value. And then we're going to calculate the scores from that function that is called calculate value score. So we can go to definition, which is this one. So that's further down in the same class. And here you can see you reset the score to 0 and the max score to 0. And then you check the price to book. So as you can see here, these functions here, they use this stock data df, which is a data frame. If you go back here to the definition, you can see score portfolio. The data is being set here, okay? So you're setting this metrics data frame, and you have a certain select columns from here, from this list, and then those are the ones you want to set into that data frame. And then you pass this data frame when you want to score this portfolio. And that portfolio, as you can see here, is this function, and you're passing in this data frame. And a lot of these are similar when you're getting into passing in. It's basically the stock data is being set that is basically passed into each function here, as you can see, this one. So yeah, it's a little tricky to follow this, but you can also see that this score is the analysis score class, and it's going to return a list. So again, then without going through all this stuff, but you basically have categories. So if the overall score is greater than or equal to 80, it's a strong buy. And these are being calculated above here. And that's the overall Lynch score. And it's based on these categories. And as you can see here, this is price to sales. You're getting a score that way. You can follow this yourself. Here is the price to book. And each one of these are falling into a category. So the categories I'm talking about is basically the PEG ratio, the financial health group, the growth quality, and value. And these categories are part of that scorer. So you can see here, each of these ratios, if you will, or PEG scores, what have you, will be graded here by following these if statements. So revenue, for example, revenue growth, 30% weight, and then you'll get these calculations based on those scores. Each one of these falls under group heading. This is based on the growth, so these metrics are inside the growth category. Then you have this one here is part of the financial health category. So here is the PEG category, PEG ratio category, the score. This calculations I went through in my other ones. I'm not going to repeat it. If you look at part 2 of that Go, where the Peter Lynch metrics are discussed, I kind of go through how this was calculated. So check that out. And finally, down on the bottom down here, you can see there's some value category, and that's price to book, as you can see. It's the price to sales ratio, and there's the dividend yield ratio. And then you calculate an overall score, and then you have some recommendations you do. I want to go through this notebook here. First thing we do, we import some libraries, as you can see here. Here we're setting up some basically pandas data frame settings for options. And then we're creating a logging object right here. Okay, so again, notice that this and this is internal to this project. These are the two classes up here, as you can see. Well, these are actually Python files, but they have classes within those files. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm importing this stuff here. And then I'm setting the logging. I'm recording this by printing it out. So I'm setting up the database path, which is basically going to be the name of the database. Here is just some tickers you can set up like in a list format. And here I'm setting some score criteria like PEG max, ROE min, and debt to equity max. So these are ratios, so percentages. And then you simply print out some stuff here. So let me clear this so we can get a clean start. So clear all outputs. All right, so let's just kind of run this as we go, and we'll talk to it as we go here. So I got to make sure that I'm in the right section here. Source file could not be read. What's going on here? So I'm running these import statements. Let's see if it works. Yeah, it worked. So there's something. So that worked. Libraries was loaded. So let's set up the database path, and let's load the tickers, and let's set up some of the cutoff points here. As you can see down here, it's writing it out. Let me minimize this. Then we're going to initialize the analyzer. All right, so I'm going to pass in to the LynchAnalyzer, which is this one. I'm going to initialize that class here, as you can see, this one. And I'm initializing by passing in that database path, as you can see here, okay? And this is the database name in case you don't pass in a database. It will do this default one here. All right, so that's I'm passing it in here, setting up a scorer object based on this LynchScorer class. And here I'm just printing out a bunch of stuff, as you can see. So let's run that. Okay, so you can see here, LynchAnalyzer, database tables created and verified. So it went through all the code in the LynchAnalyzer, and here you can see, here's the database that it created right here. So here I'm going to add the tickers to the analyzer object. So let me do that. So it added 10 tickers to the database, as you can see here. Then I want to view the current tickers, and then I'm printing out some stuff, and then this is the tickers data frame. So let's do that. And as you can see, it grabbed 10 tickers from the database, and there's 10 active ones. You can see here, true. And here's the tickers, AbbVie, RGTI, Palantir, Tesla, etc. So that's that one. Then I can fetch data from Yahoo Finance, and it starts grabbing each ticker and going to get the info object from Yahoo Finance, and then it says it processed 10 different stocks. So data fetch was completed. Now we should have some data in the database, and then I'm creating this metrics data frame. These are the key display columns I want to use, and then I'm going to create this metrics data frame here. All right, so let's run that. And here you can see, now that we did that, we went against DuckDB, and we got those tickers, and we got the metrics information. Those we want to select that up here. Only a few of them, not all of them. So current price, we got the trailing PE, PEG ratio, we got the earnings growth, debt to equity, and return on equity. All right, so now we can start scoring the stuff, and we want to find out if there is any candidates here. And you can see here, we're printing out, and these the strong buy, moderate buy, hold, etc. And here's the cutoff points, and there's some Python code within this print statement, as you can see here. So let's run that, and as you can see, it scored 10 stocks. It has one that was a strong buy. It has one that was a buy. There was 3 moderate buys. There was 3 holds, and there was 2 sells out of those 10 stocks. Okay, so you can see them here. There's the overall scores. Here's the recommendations. And of course, these are the metrics. And it also gives you a reasoning here. I can export as a file, but I can also open it in Data Wrangler. And this one gives you all kinds of statistics. So it gives you a lot of extra information here, as you can see. Yeah, so it has some potentials to do some deeper analysis over your data frames or your data. So I just want to show you that quick. Let's go and find out the Lynch candidates. So here I'm going to print that based on the PEG ratio, the ROE, the debt to equity, and the positive earnings growth. So I'm creating candidates here. Remember, you had some max and mins set in like a default numbers. Here we're going to make sure that it's not empty when we run this. And then we're going to write out some stuff. If you find somebody, here is the things, the scores, etc., etc., etc. So let's run that cell and see what happens. So here you can see the PEG ratio is less than 1. ROE is greater than 15%. Debt to equity is less than 50%, which it has a positive earnings growth. So we found one candidate based on these cutoffs and these metrics. And it turns out in this case, there's NVIDIA. You can see here's all the related metrics, and there's more than one here, as you can see. For example, the PEG ratio is 0.72, which is less than 1, so that's a good thing. It has a trailing PE of 47. The revenue growth is 62%. According to our numbers here, it picked this one as a candidate. The next thing we want to do then is write out the top recommendations. So when you print that, you can see these are the top 10. Well, we don't have more than 10 anyway, so it's not even doing much for us here. So I just want to show you can do that. You can also analyze specific stocks, for example, Palantir in this case. And you go through the metrics here and you print them out as we go. And here you go and get it from Yahoo Finance. So this is separate from what we just did. And then you analyze it based on all the printout statements here. So you can see here's Palantir. The reason I picked this is I wanted to show you that the terrible price to earnings ratio. Look at this, 438 to 1 price to earnings. So in other words, you're paying $438 for $1 of earnings. Yeah, so unless, they have a lot of AI stuff going, a lot of government contracts and military, etc. But I don't know how much this company can keep growing. I don't know. So you can see it gives you the Lynch score. The recommendation is hold. There's the PEG ratio, financial health, financial quality. So this one ran that over for that Palantir stock only. All right, so it tells you the reason why, because the high PEG ratio is not good. Did have strong balance sheet with a debt to equity of only 3.5, strong earnings growth of 200%, excellent return on equity of 19.5%. So here's the growth estimates. And there's also high dividend yielders you can run here based on the analyzer object, where you can say select these fields where the dividend yield is greater than 3%, limited to 10. So that's just yet another query that you want to look for individual numbers. So that goes against the DuckDB database, and you can look at this closer yourself. I just want to keep going here. You can look for growth stocks. Again, it's simply the same thing. You're just looking for earnings growth that are greater than 15% and revenue growth that is greater than 10%. So when you run that, these are the companies that comes back with those cutoffs. You can also do the same thing for value stock. Let's just run it. Price to book less than 2, trailing PE less than 15, return on equity greater than 10%. And you can see here, this is what came back, nothing. Didn't find that combination. You can export the results. So for example, here is the fields. You can create a CSV file based on this. Here's the name of it. And then you print out, and then you can do the LynchScorer, Lynch metrics, and the Lynch candidates. When you run that, you're getting 3 CSV files. This one, here's the candidates, and here's the LynchScorer, PEG ratio, etc. So yeah, you can export it into CSV files, and you can see here how many candidates we exported for each grouping. Finally then, we're getting into the financial statements, and you can see the actual numbers. Now, I just picked Apple here, so you can display the balance sheet. I've done this before, but I went against Edgar to get this. So let's run that. So we got income statement. We got the first 4 columns of data. So that means we got 2025, 2024, 2023, and 2022. And here is the actual accounts, treasury shares, ordinary shares, total debt. And so these are in dollar figures, as you can see here. Now, that's one thing. That's the balance sheet. Here is the income statement. And here is the cash flow statement. What I also did was I created this pro forma analysis. So instead of seeing in dollars, I created 2 versions. One where you show the balance sheet and the vertical analysis. So that means that you take each account and you divide it on the total assets, for example. And that will give you a percentage of the total. So, for example, your cash as a percentage of total assets, etc. And I did a horizontal analysis too, which is basically year-over-year percentage changes. Okay, so that one is per account. So it only shows the growth or the decline in each account in a percentage term. And I did this for balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow. So when I run that now, you can see down here, this is a little more involved because I do some formatting. I did use this mapping function to get it showing up as percentages instead of just long numbers. So when you look at the output here now, You can see there's quite a bit of code in here. Okay, so I guess it still had some issues with this one, it looks like, but I don't have time to fix it right now. But you can see here is the vertical analysis. So you can see, so these are there's 50 or 60 accounts. And when I see the 100 here, you know, that's okay, so here's the total asset column, right? So total asset divided on total asset will always be 1. So that's 100%. So here you can see all these other ones. For example, you can see current liabilities is 46% of the total liabilities plus stockholders' equity. So it's 46%. So that's quite a bit, actually. Okay. And here is the horizontal analysis. So you're going row by row here in this case. Make sure you take this number minus this divided on this number from the actual dollar figures. Because depending how you set it up, it might calculate this minus this divided on this. So go to the left instead of the right. You do periods is equal to -1 when you use this percentage change method. And that's how you get the right order here, because the latest years is to the left. So just be aware of that when you do these calculations. And then, of course, we also got the key financial ratios here. You calculate it, and that's the gross margin, operating margin, net margin, return on assets, and the free cash flow margin. You can also do some additional stuff like ticker management, where you can add new tickers this way, okay? And you can do some summary statistics like this, and where you have how many stocks were analyzed, 10 stocks, technology was 5, consumer cyclicals were 2, communication service was 2, and healthcare was 1. And then you can see the average metrics calculated, and you do some score statistics as well. And then you can also do custom queries, and I'll let you look at this. And then finally, when you're done, you want to close that DuckDB connection. And you do that by calling this analyzer object, which is the analyzer class, and then you call the close method. So when you go to this class here, at the very end here, there should be a method that closes the database connection. And that's what you're doing right here, okay? So you close that, and now the database is closed. And you can see up here that wall WAL extension that showed that this was open disappeared now because we closed the object. So it removed that temporary file there. Okay, so now the next steps, you can customize this, obviously. You can add more tickers. You can create some more custom queries. You can schedule updates to do this on a regular basis. And these are the functions that are kind of key. You add tickers, you fetch and store stock data, get the candidates, and the metric summary, and then you can export it. And here is for LynchScorer, is this one here. And that's the end of my video. So I really hope you liked this video. And if you do, please give me a like. Consider subscribing to my channel. It'll be fantastic. We'll see you in the next video. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.